The desert evening bled gold and crimson when Samuel Holt rode home alone. Wind scraped through sagebrush, carrying a silence too heavy for a man's heart. His wife and newborn had died 3 winters ago, and every hoofbeat since had echoed that loss. He often spoke to his horse because it was easier than speaking to ghosts. But that night, as dusk fell, another sound cracked the stillness, a cry, faint and fragile, like a prayer being swallowed by dust. Samuel reined in, listening. Beneath the cliffs, he saw movement, a woman clutching 2 small shapes huddled in torn blankets. He approached slowly, afraid his presence might shatter them. Her eyes lifted, wide with fear and exhaustion. "Please," she breathed, barely audible, "we haven't eaten in 5 days." The words struck him like a bullet straight through the ribs. For a long moment he couldn't move, then he reached for the saddlebag that carried his last loaf of bread. He tore the bread apart, handing pieces first to the children. Their little hands trembled as they ate, crumbs mixing with tears. The woman stared, not taking a bite until he pressed the last piece into her palm. "You'll need it more than I will," he said quietly. She hesitated, then whispered, "Why help us? You don't even know my name." He looked at the fading sky. "Maybe I remember what hunger feels like, just not the kind you feed with bread." When the children fell asleep, Samuel lifted them onto his horse and led it on foot through the dark. The woman followed, stumbling from weakness. "I'm Clara," she murmured. "Clara Reeves." He nodded but said little. The stars watched their slow procession across the plain, the hoof steps keeping time with Clara's soft sobs. By the time lantern light from his cabin flickered ahead, Samuel realized something inside him had shifted, like a locked door quietly unlatched. At dawn, Clara awoke in a real bed for the first time in months. The cabin was rough but safe, smoke rose from the chimney where Samuel warmed water. He apologized that he had little to offer beyond beans and silence. Yet when she smiled weakly and said, "Silence can be kind," the room somehow felt full. Outside, her children chased a chicken, laughing for the first time since she could remember. The sound startled Samuel, it had been years since laughter lived here. Each day carved a fragile rhythm. Samuel worked fences, Clara washed, mended, planted. They spoke in small doses, careful not to disturb the peace growing between them. She noticed how he paused before entering a room, as if asking permission from memories. He noticed how she hummed lullabies even when her voice trembled. The ranch, once a graveyard of echoes, began to breathe again, hesitant but alive. One evening he found her staring at the sunset, arms wrapped around herself. "Storm's coming," he said. "It already came," she whispered. Then she told him, about her husband ambushed on the trail, about the fire that devoured their wagon, about walking through desert nights with 2 starving children and no map except faith. When she finished, the silence was thick with shared ache. Samuel didn't speak, he just placed his coat around her shoulders and stayed until the stars appeared. That night he lay awake listening to the soft breathing of the children in the next room. He thought of all the things he'd buried, his laughter, his prayers, his reason to come home. Before dawn he rose, saddled his horse, and tied every coin he owned in a handkerchief. Clara caught him at the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To town," he said. "A ranch feeds on more than sorrow." She tried to stop him, but he rode into the gray horizon without another word. In town, Samuel traded his remaining cattle for sacks of flour, salt, and seed. He worked 2 extra days, shoeing horses for the blacksmith, eating only when offered scraps. By the 3rd night he was bone-tired but richer in something heavier than gold, purpose. When he finally returned, dust-covered and half-starved, Clara met him halfway down the path. She didn't speak, she simply touched his arm and whispered, "You came back." Over supper they laughed about nothing at all, the beans burning, the children fighting over biscuits. It felt like the world was learning to breathe again. When Clara thanked him, her voice wavered. "You've already saved us." Samuel looked away, his throat tight. "Maybe we're saving each other," he said. The words hung between them, fragile and true. Weeks passed, marked by the steady rhythm of ordinary miracles. Green shoots in the garden, repaired fences, bedtime stories told by lamplight. Samuel caught himself humming while he worked. He didn't notice the change in Clara's eyes, the way they lingered on him longer each evening, until one twilight she brought him coffee and said, "You make this place feel like home." He wanted to answer, but the rumble of hooves cut through the moment. A dark line of riders appeared on the ridge, armed men, dust trailing behind them. Samuel's face hardened, Clara's cup fell from her hand. "Who are they?" he asked, already knowing. Her lips trembled. "The men who killed my husband." Samuel's stomach knotted. He turned toward the cabin. "Get the children inside." She grabbed his sleeve. "They'll kill you." He met her eyes steadily. "Not before they try." He loaded his rifle, the metal cold in his hands. For years he'd wished for death. Now he prayed for life, not his, but theirs. As the riders descended the hill, the old ghosts inside him rose too. But this time, he wasn't facing them alone. The riders stopped just short of the fence line, dust swirling around them like a storm. Their leader dismounted, a scarred man with cold eyes and a cruel grin. "Looks like the widow found herself a new protector," he sneered. Samuel stood firm, the rifle steady in his hands. "You've ridden far enough," he said calmly. The man laughed. "That woman owes me. Her husband took something that was mine." Clara's voice broke from behind the porch. "You took his life." The bandit's grin vanished. He raised his hand, signaling his men forward. Samuel fired once, the bullet striking the dirt near their boots. "Next one won't miss," he warned. The men hesitated, they hadn't expected defiance from a lone rancher. Samuel's pulse thundered, but his voice never shook. "You'll leave now," he said, "or I'll bury every one of you right here." His courage wasn't born of rage, but of love, the kind that defends without question. The leader snarled and drew his gun. Before he could aim, a second shot rang out, from behind Samuel. Clara stood on the porch, trembling but fierce, holding the pistol Samuel had given her for safety. The bullet grazed the bandit's arm, sending his weapon spinning into the dirt. The standoff broke into chaos, horses rearing, men shouting, gunfire cracking through the twilight. Samuel dropped behind the trough, reloading fast as bullets shattered wood around him. Then came a thunderous roar. Neighbors, ranchers from miles around, hearing the shots, galloped in with rifles raised. The bandits, outnumbered and cornered, turned tail and fled across the open plain, vanishing into the dust they had come from. Samuel lowered his gun, chest heaving, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Clara ran to him, her hands shaking. "You're bleeding," she gasped. He smiled faintly. "Nothing serious. They're gone." And with that, he finally let himself collapse to his knees. That night the ranch was alive with lantern light and gratitude. The neighbors helped patch the damage, promising to watch the borders for more outlaws. The children clung to Samuel's coat as if afraid he might disappear. When the last visitor left, Clara stood in the doorway, her eyes glistening. "You risked your life for us," she said. Samuel shook his head slowly. "For family," he corrected. "That's what men are supposed to do." In the days that followed, peace returned, but it wasn't the old, hollow peace Samuel once knew. It was alive, humming with warmth and laughter. Clara tended the garden while Samuel taught her son to ride. Her daughter picked wildflowers and set them by his plate each evening. Sometimes Samuel would catch Clara watching him with that same quiet gratitude, and every time, he felt the ache in his chest ease a little more. Weeks later, the preacher from town rode up to deliver supplies. When he saw Clara and Samuel together, he smiled knowingly. "You've built yourselves a good home here," he said. Clara looked down shyly, brushing her hands on her apron. Samuel cleared his throat. "It's missing one thing," he murmured. The preacher tilted his head. "And what's that?" Samuel looked at Clara. "A name we can all share." Clara froze, her breath catching. "Samuel," she whispered, tears rising in her eyes. "You don't have to." He stepped closer, his rough hands trembling slightly as he took hers. "I know," he said softly. "But I want to." The children stood watching from the porch, wide-eyed, as Samuel knelt in the dirt and said, "Clara Reeves, will you take my name, and let this ranch, let me, be your home?" Her answer came in silence, only a tear rolling down her cheek before she nodded. The preacher smiled through moist eyes. "Well," he said, "no need to wait for Sunday service." Under that same wide Texas sky where sorrow once ruled, Samuel and Clara exchanged vows with nothing but love, wind, and two laughing children as witnesses. That evening, the table that once held only beans now held bread, warm and fresh. Samuel watched Clara slice it, remembering the night he first broke bread with her in the dust. She placed a piece in his hand and whispered, "You gave us this once. Now let me give it back." He smiled, his eyes soft with peace. "No," he said gently, "we give it to each other." As the sun sank beyond the hills, the ranch glowed with life, smoke rising from the chimney, laughter spilling through the open windows. Samuel Holt, once a man broken by loss, now sat surrounded by the family he'd never expected to find. And though the desert beyond still stretched wild and endless, inside that little cabin was something far greater than land or gold. It was home.